2,000 miles from the nearest inhabited landmass, lying half-buried in the shattered rock of a volcanic crater, is a piece of carved stone so unbelievably massive it literally breaks our understanding of what ancient human beings could pull off. It's just sitting there, frozen in time. This is Rapa Nui, a tiny, incredibly isolated speck of land in the southeastern Pacific that you probably know as Easter Island. 270 tons. That is the estimated weight of this single, unfinished colossus they call El Gigante. To put that in perspective, that's about the weight of a fully loaded commercial airliner. If the carvers had ever actually finished this thing, it would have stood nearly 72 feet tall. It is a staggering, mind-bending number that forces us to look at this island and ask, how on earth did the Rapa Nui people engineer something on this scale? And the craziest part? El Gigante wasn't some isolated, one-off dream. The islanders successfully carved 887 of these monolithic statues, the Moai, out of compressed volcanic ash. We're talking about stone ancestors that, on average, stood 13 feet tall and weighed 14 tons. The largest one they ever successfully stood upright, named Paro, weighed an astounding 82 tons. They even topped a lot of them off with these massive redstone hats called pukao, which weighed up to 12 tons each and were quarried from an entirely different side of the island. They dragged these massive blocks up to 11 miles across violently uneven, rocky terrain. And they did the whole shebang without a single metal tool, no wheels, and absolutely no draft animals.
So, how exactly do you move an 82-ton chunk of rock across a volcanic island without modern technology? When the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen stumbled onto the island on Easter Sunday back in 1722, his crew literally couldn't fathom it. For centuries, this mystery spawned wild, completely debunked theories. You had adventurers like Thor Heyerdahl famously claiming that South Americans must have settled the island, simply because the engineering feat just seemed way too complex for a supposedly isolated group of Polynesians. That's a romantic idea, sure, but modern DNA and archaeology have completely dismantled it.
But the actual answer? It was finally proven in 2011 through experimental archaeology, and honestly, it is beautifully simple and totally unexpected. They didn't roll them on massive wooden tracks. They walked them. A modern team of just 18 people tied 3 ropes to the head of a replica statue. By tilting the massive stone just slightly forward and pulling side to side, they created this rhythmic, walking motion. Think about it. It's the exact same logic you use when you stubbornly wiggle and walk a heavy refrigerator across your kitchen floor.
And here is where it gets incredibly ironic. For hundreds of years, outsiders wrote heavy books and argued in academic circles, trying to invent these wildly complex solutions. But the Rapa Nui oral tradition had maintained a very simple claim all along: the statues walked from the quarry. Turns out, it wasn't a myth. It wasn't some poetic metaphor. It was a literal, factual engineering manual hiding in plain sight.
But the mystery of the moving statues is really only half the story of Rapa Nui. The other half is how this incredible civilization supposedly collapsed. Now, if you've ever read Jared Diamond's super popular book Collapse, you've definitely heard of Ecocide. The popular story goes that the islanders were so insanely obsessed with building bigger and bigger statues that they greedily chopped down every last giant palm tree to use as rollers, utterly destroying their own environment and starving themselves in a frenzy of resource wars. It's a terrifying narrative of self-inflicted ecological suicide. But archaeological reality reveals a very different and deeply surprising story.
The primary culprit for the island's deforestation wasn't some manic obsession with statue building. It was rats, tiny Polynesian rats. When the very first Polynesian voyagers arrived around 800 AD, navigating thousands of miles by the stars in double-hulled canoes, which is just wild in itself, they brought essentials for a new colony: sweet potatoes, chickens, and, completely by accident, rats hitching a ride. With zero natural predators on the island, the rat population exploded. They relentlessly devoured the seeds of the island's giant palm trees. Over a few centuries, they systematically prevented the forest from regenerating, quietly eating the island's ecosystem from the ground up.
But here is the thing. When the trees vanished, the Rapa Nui didn't just throw up their hands, descend into madness, and die. They adapted. They invented an absolutely brilliant agricultural hack known as lithic mulching. The islanders meticulously smashed volcanic rocks into tiny fragments and spread them across the barren, deforested fields. This massive rock gardening project shielded the topsoil from the harsh winds, locked in precious moisture, and slowly released nutrients back into the dead earth. They essentially engineered a way to survive, maintaining a thriving, functioning society of thousands on an island completely stripped of its trees. So they actually survived the loss of their forests. They didn't destroy themselves through ecological greed. But make no mistake, a total collapse did happen. The true catastrophe just didn't come from the environment. It came from the horizon. The actual timeline of Rapa Nui's destruction is shockingly rapid, and it's apocalyptic. It started with brief contexts, like that Dutch arrival in 1722, which immediately kicked off a skirmish, leaving a dozen islanders dead. But the fatal, completely devastating blow struck on December 12, 1862. Peruvian slave raiders descended on the island, violently kidnapping around 1,500 people. That was a full third of the island's entire remaining population, just dragged away to mine guano in horrific conditions. When international outrage finally forced Peru to send the survivors back, only 15 of those 1,500 made it home alive. And they brought smallpox with them. By 1877, disease had ravaged the island, plunging a population that once numbered in the tens of thousands down to exactly 111 human beings.
And it wasn't just a horrific, devastating loss of life. It was an absolute cultural erasure. The slavers didn't just take bodies for labor. They took King Kamakoi. They captured virtually all of the scholars. You see, Rapa Nui possessed the only indigenous writing system ever developed anywhere in Polynesia, known as Rongorongo. And in a single, violent generation, the only people on Earth who knew how to read it were wiped out. An entire civilization's deeply complex oral history, their genealogy, and the literal key to their unique written script were silenced permanently.
This civilization achieved something completely astonishing in total isolation. They survived massive ecological shifts through pure human ingenuity, only to be systematically dismantled by a wider world that cared absolutely nothing for what it found. Today, the giant palms are extinct. The Rongorongo script remains undeciphered, its actual meaning lost forever. And every single moai that still stands on Rapa Nui stares silently inland, its back turned forever to the ocean, as if refusing to even acknowledge the sea that brought the ships that took everything away.